wish I had more impressive adventures like I landed in Normandy or, was parachuting out somewhere, but just a short Jewish guy from Jersey. That's all I got. As it says, I'm Steven Weiss. I'm the Executive Vice President at Rubenstein PR. Our office, you can hit a rock. It's on the other side of this building, over here, right on 6th Avenue and 53rd. I'm the Executive Vice President of the agency as well as the corporate group leader. So all the corporate accounts, I oversee all the accounts, but all the corporate accounts come into my group as well. So, I was asked to do this, and it was such a pleasure. And the topic in and of itself is really, it's a topic near and dear to my heart because it's something that I've done for the last probably 28 to 30 years of my life, which is public relations and being inside boardrooms and watching the process during a crisis. And it's enlightening to see what happens during a crisis with very educated, very accomplished individuals. And when a crisis begins, it's akin to watching sometimes very young children playing soccer where everyone runs to the ball and there's no one spread out, and learn how to deal with that as a PR individual who can step back as part of the company. Now, I was inside for 27 years inside these companies, so I was part of the company. But I had obviously a different perspective than a lot of people that sat on the board. Successfully navigating crisis really requires a strategic insight, clear communication, and a steady hand. So there are some fundamental principles that I want to discuss with you that can be applied effectively when you're managing a crisis at the board level with your boards, and how to handle the crisis when it arises, because it will arise. So it's not a question of if, it's always a question of when. And that doesn't mean the severity of the crisis rises to a 10, but you'd be shocked when a crisis is at a 3, how much that can permeate an entire organization, and especially both internally and externally. And I'll go into that a little more of what I mean by that, because there is sometimes a fundamental misunderstanding that you are handling a crisis that is inside and it's walled off. That it's your crisis, it's what you have to deal with, and then all of a sudden you realize, without even knowing, it has bled out to all your key stakeholders. And now you find yourself trying to deal internally with your employees, with your professionals, with your brand, your mission, your promise, plus all of the people who utilize your services at the same time. It is not easy. Every crisis is different, yet there are some fundamental, what I call blocking and tackling issues. Could sort of use that in PR. Fundamental blocking and tackling issues that occur almost in every crisis. It doesn't matter what the crisis is. As Peter said, it's culture, it's the people, it's the history of the company, it's the brand, it's the mission, it's the trust. So just a little about me quickly. Like I said, I've been in PR for nearly 30 years, practically right out of college. Syracuse University undergrad, George Washington University, master's degree in public relations out of their school of political, I think they called it political science at the time. Truth be told, I wanted to be a political speechwriter, but realized that didn't pay the mortgage when I got married. So I quickly went into something that paid a little bit better than political speechwriter, and that was public relations and sometimes marketing. My experience really is representing major for-profit health systems in the beginning, major non-profit health systems, I've worked with medical groups, biopharma, medtech, clean energy, fintech, and a lot of other areas. The last 7 years, I've been on the agency side. So I've been on the other side of the desk, as I call it. So not inside companies, but on the other side handling portfolios of all different companies. And I've been with Rubenstein for nearly 3 years now, which is amazing because I felt like I joined them yesterday. And just so everyone knows, I do live in New Jersey. So don't hold it against me. But I was born and raised in Jersey, lived in California for 18 years, in Los Angeles, and then moved back with my family in '05. I said there's commonality in boardrooms and crisis. But there is a consistency that you need to stay to strict adherence to communication, to process, and above all, transparency. Now, when I say transparency, I know it scares a lot of people, because transparency makes you vulnerable. It automatically makes, and certainly in boardrooms, and I've seen this again over decades, when I used to talk about transparency, I'd see this visceral response, mostly from the lawyers, who would recoil when I say transparency, because they feel that every word has to be measured, every I dotted, every T crossed. Well, that's wonderful if life moved that slowly. But in a crisis has its own speed, its own life cycle, and there are 1,001 outside forces that influence the crisis more than just X happened, Y, X happened, we have to deal with the Y, and we're trying to come out on the other side. That's a simplistic, very linear way of thinking about a crisis. A crisis is never linear, ever. Just when you think you've gotten in front of it, I used to wake up in the morning and get a phone call and go, how in God's name? I went to bed and it was under control. And now I'm waking up, and it seems like the horses got out of the barn again, and they're all running around again. That is why I like what I do for a living. I enjoy that. But to people who sit on boards, and for companies of any size, it is a frightening, and I use that word purposefully, it is a frightening experience for a lot of people, having to deal with something they cannot control. So you're in a board who's used to making decisions, being able to affect governance changes, and now they're faced with something that they can't get their arms around. That is why someone like me is in the room, because I look at it from a much different optic. I look at how we deal with it in the moment, how we deal with it the next day, but ultimately, what's the result? And I'm going to jump around my notes a little bit. One word is really what I always have told board of directors, no matter what the crisis, and that is, at the end of the day, the operative word is trust. If you go through your crisis with your board, and they don't have a fundamental understanding that the end result has to be a trust from your key stakeholders externally who believe in you as a product, from people in your community who know you personally. If there's a lack of trust, that sometimes it could have been 50 years, 60, 70, 100 years of trust. It's astounding how fast your legs are cut out from under you when something bad happens. People forget what was, and they only know what is. So you really have to set the stage for everything you're doing has to involve some aspect of transparency and trust. And I mentioned the lawyers, how they recoiled. And I'm going to say something now that I purposely used to say in boardrooms, and the lawyers would have their little, I'd see their eyes blinking quickly, and I would say there is no saying you're sorry is not an admission of guilt. And to most people, depending on what they think, people believe that saying you're sorry is you saying we're at fault, but we're culpable to the nth degree. No, saying you're sorry is just empathy. It's not an admission. It's saying we're human. Something went wrong. There's an issue at the table, but you can say you're sorry, and then everything springboards from that point of view. For board of directors, that is not very easy, and for very educated individuals, for lawyers, for captains of industry, it's not so easy for them to be that flexible. But you learn after a while that sorry is incredibly powerful. So I'd like you to keep that in mind, especially when I look at the last 2 decades and I see some high-profile companies who have failed spectacularly in their public relations efforts. And I just pulled a few, and you will know these immediately. The gentleman being dragged down the aisle on a United Airlines flight, screaming and carrying on because they overbooked the flight. He didn't want to get off. He was screaming and yelling and carrying on. It's handled horribly by United Airlines. It became a YouTube and a social meme. It was terrible. BP and the Deepwater Horizon, how they handled that oil leak, not our fault, not our fault, not our fault. Yeah, it was their fault. Balenciaga, I don't know, people may remember this, but I think it was like 2 years ago, they had a campaign with children holding a teddy bear dressed in BDSM-inspired outfits. I don't know if anyone remembers this. How that became a good idea and how that got out of the boardroom, I have no idea. But these are the things that occur that in the moment people believe, for some reason, are okay. They're not. I was at a company that the FBI came on the floor and raided our computers. I've dealt with intoxicated CEOs, embezzlement, pretty much every other issue you can imagine. And in healthcare, which is a crisis a day for some reason or another, the words you dread when you walk in and then you go to your board is wrong site surgery. That is always you never want to hear that, but shockingly, it happens. Wrong patient, wrong diagnosis, wrong surgery, it happens. The point is, when the unimaginable occurs, that has costly repercussions, financially, trust, overall trust. The board is, while its charge is governance, is responsible for a response. It starts there. It does trickle down to the C-suite, and management, because that's the sum of the parts. The whole is, the board is representing the brand, the company, whether it's a public company or it's a major nonprofit. The board ultimately has to take a stand without running into each other, bouncing off the walls, and having 15, 20 different voices coming all at them at the same time. That's not easy for a group of people who are used to making decisions and then watching it happen. It is an unfamiliar territory. There's no magic wand where you can say, do this, and this happens. It doesn't work like that in a crisis. In a crisis, you strategically have to settle yourself down and start fundamentally at what happened. And that question is not an easy one to answer. It becomes very, unless it's an inebriated CEO, it's very linear. But short of that, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for someone to understand that a crisis may have occurred, but it may have occurred starting a year ago, right? The O-rings on the shuttle was a year in the making before the shuttle blew up. They knew what was NASA knew what was going on. if the temperature dropped low enough, those O-rings were brittle. It became so commonplace after a while, no one paid attention. They paid attention when the Challenger blew up. And all of a sudden, it became an issue. And they went back and went, geez, we had these memos from over a year ago from engineers. Maybe someone should have read it. Maybe someone look. Now you're on the defensive. It does happen. So, all the time and money and hard work developing a brand and a mission takes seconds to be questioned. And that's where a board of directors and someone in crisis management steps in and says, okay, now we're going to figure out what happened and we have to rebuild. So what happens when a never event occurs? The phrase never event is actually used in hospitals more than anything. A never event is exactly what it says. An event that should never have happened. And in healthcare, a never event is life and death, oftentimes. I use never event in a different way for corporations. It should never have happened. And I'm talking in respect to no one died, but it was an event that just destroys for the moment credibility of a company. Be it a product, something happened in the C-suite, something happened with stockholders, something happened with an equity partner. Something happened that should not have happened, but it happened. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do when the first time that I used to walk into a boardroom and I see what was happening and everyone is speaking at the same time. Everyone has an opinion. Not bad opinions, by the way. Very educated, learned opinions. And my tactic used to be, and still is, let everyone punch themselves out. Everyone has an opinion, everyone's talking and yelling and my way, and then I could sense when that certainly hit a crescendo and people are starting to tire of what's going on, then I usually step in and go, okay, everyone good, everyone out, everyone tired, now we have to get down to business. The time is of the essence. So what you need to do is you need really to think about your key internal and external stakeholders, engage with your lawyers, whether it's representative inside, and I'm sure there's in bigger companies plenty of lawyers on the board. You need to speak to them. They're important. You need a comprehensive overview, as far as you know, of what happened. And believe me, when someone says they know it all, they're giving you about 45% of it. Because as the days go on, you realize, oh, I never knew that. How is that possible that happened and no one knew? And that's iterative, and it evolves over time. So you have to be fluid. And that's another thing that boards are not, that's not easy. When 1 and 1 is 2 in the life of people who deal in numbers, black and white, no gray. 1 plus 1 is 2. I deal in 1 and 1 is 3. 1 and 1 is 5. There are days when 1 and 1 is 6, meaning that the world changes. The voice of the customer can evolve. Social media changes. Accusations, rumor. You have to be flexible. But again, the equal sign has to be retention of trust at the end of the day. And I said, that's why I jumped to this, and I said in my notes, saying sorry is not an admission of guilt. You are allowed to say that. And during a crisis, there's always an inflection point between the desire to release information very quickly. You find out what happened, you'll always have people go, get out with it, get out with it, get out with it immediately. Get in front of it, get out with it, see if that lowers the temperature a little bit, gives you some breathing space. That's great if you really have a handle on what happened. Some crises are at a 2, others are at a 9 or a 10. I mean, it could be life or death, or the survivability of a company for that matter. Because the corollary of going out too fast, and for people making decisions too fast, is really, are you providing oxygen to the story that's going to keep it alive? Meaning, you have to understand, the more you talk about and when I say you, I mean a board, a company, an organization, the more you talk about it, the more oxygen you're putting in to the story. So you could say more oxygen, why, ringing the bell, but so there's a very delicate balance between being transparent, getting in front of it, because remember, getting in front of a story quickly shrinks the gap of people filling in the story for you, because if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to tell your story, which means their story is going to be their point of view. They're going to go out on social media and talk about it. I mean, we don't live in the world, and I started this career in '87 when I was pulling over for payphones and had pagers. There was no other way, but any information that went out was from me. I provided the information. Those days are over. The social media, within minutes, someone is on. An employee who signed a protocol that says you cannot be online representing your company. You can't be online with a picture of your badge. You can be online as a person on your own. You might as well just drive down the turnpike and throw that out the window, because they get on immediately. And now they're telling the story. So now you are battling, unfortunately, sometimes your own people internally. And then a board has to understand that a door swings both ways. Every time you go out with a story, that's great, but they really don't like when the door swings the other way and other people are telling the story. And that becomes sort of a battle. But it shouldn't really be a battle. At the end of the day, it is a tricky dance. But ultimately, survivability and coming at the other end stronger and more trustworthy is really the ultimate goal. Now, there'll be, like I said, those who argue that during a crisis you need to be vague and hope the crisis disappears. If you don't talk about it, it didn't happen. And that happens in an incredibly amount of time. Just put our heads down. It'll just go away. Nothing goes away. Especially on the internet, it's forever. That doesn't mean the voice becomes incredibly loud all the time. Ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows, ebbs and flows. But I refer to those people who want to be vague and things will get better as pathological optimists. No matter what you tell them, it's going to be good. Everything's going to work out. The other side of that are pathological pessimists. I'm saying that 10 times fast. Pathological pessimists who see a problem under every rock. Every decision you make becomes an argument, which absolutely paralyzes a board as well. That's why, amid a crisis, there should be one voice. Not 10 voices, one voice. And it could be the board chair. It could be a voice. It could be the CEO of the company. The point is, you cannot have two people unless if it was an interview and I'm a topic expert. That's different. When someone's speaking for the organization, one voice and one voice only, because it becomes much too complicated to say he said, she said, they said. Doesn't work that way. People are reading this in the newspaper, seeing it online. You don't want feedback attributed in quotes attributed to 5 different people. You want it all directed at one person, and then the board, the PR decides who should be those topic experts they put up. That's really not easy. The other issue in a crisis is board members used to say to me all the time, Steven, what do I say when I'm at a supermarket and a neighbor comes up to me and knows I sit on a board and they're reading all of this negative information right now coming out quickly, in an elevator, anywhere, but they know I'm attached to it. What do I say? And I say to them, well, you have about 30 seconds to respond to that question. Because if it takes you longer than 30 seconds to explain a situation, now you're writing a white paper, which is all well and good in context to inside, but you have to be able to show empathy and professionalism and accountability and transparency very, very quickly. Of course, I wrote the answer that they're supposed to say as a holding statement or a statement in an FAQ that I've already written. But that's not really the issue, my words. The issue is you have to make sure boards are comfortable with getting that question, because they are going to be. I had somebody, I can't remember, it was years ago, who said, you know, in the middle of a church service, someone leaned over in the middle and started asking me questions about a current crisis. And I'm like, in the middle of church? They're like, yeah. I'm like, all right, well, you know, take your 30 seconds after it's over. But go back to them and let them know that, you know, you're engaged and that you, as a representative of the company, can fill in some gaps. But I also remind the board and people like that that every person that reads about your crisis, internally and externally, is an ambassador for your message. What do I mean by that? That means every one of these, everybody externally, now internal people are naturally your ambassadors for messaging, but externally, if you could speak to someone who can not rationalize, that's the wrong word, who can articulate what is being said, well then that person you spoke to should be able to go out, and when they're asked, they should be able to. They should be able to speak. And so they become ambassadors. So, you know, this is it hurts at times, all of this, because you take it, you take it personally. It's almost like a personal attack on you. You have to sort of divorce yourself of that, of the personal attack. The old saying is it's business, not personal. You know what? That's easy when you're being personally attacked. And I'd say over the years I've been called more names than my wife has even come up with for me yet. And you get a thick skin and you get used to it because you're very focused on your mission and your task, which is to represent the company. So here's what I say. A crisis is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to strengthen your board. It's an opportunity to strengthen your skills, to re-articulate, if you have to, your mission, your trust, your transparency, your resiliency. And most of all, and this is going to sound self-serving, but it is, an outstanding skilled PR professional is what everyone pretty much needs in a boardroom. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.